Hello, everyone, and welcome to this conversation hosted by the Royal Society for Arts, Manufactures and Commerce, the RSA. I'm Stephen George, our Head of Communications. Our vision is for a world that is rebalanced, resilient and regenerative, where everyone can fulfill their potential. And our guest speaker today is perfectly placed to comment on how we might make progress towards that goal. He's a world-renowned thinker and communicator on economic theory. His books include Economics, The User's Guide, and 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism. He hails from the Republic of Korea and came to the UK to study in the 1980s and now teaches economics in London. He believes that economics is for everyone. And in fact, an RSA animate of the same name is taken from a talk he gave for us a few years back and gives a great introduction to his philosophy. Ha-Joon Chang, welcome back to the RSA.
Hi, Stephen. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this. I'm really glad to be back here. I launched my previous books with RSA, and I'm very glad that we are doing this.
So Ha-Joon's latest book, Edible Economics, aims to make challenging economic ideas more digestible by looking at them through anecdotes about food from around the world. Prawns, coconuts, carrots, bananas and chicken, and many more besides are all thrown into the stew and provide lessons on fairness, equality, economic growth, the welfare state and globalization. Ha-Joon, it's a really absorbing read, and I've got lots of questions for you, including about the current economic situation in the UK. But before we get onto that, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I combined two of my greatest passions in this book, food and economics. And yeah, let's begin at the beginning. The book starts from when I first came to Britain back in 1986 as a graduate student at the University of Cambridge. My spoken English was poor. I still have a thick accent, but I could hardly speak then. Racial and cultural prejudices were rampant, and the weather was rubbish. But the most difficult thing was food. Before coming to Britain, I had been warned by books because very few Koreans then had been to Britain. I had been warned that food in Britain was not the best, but when I came to the country and tasted the food, I just couldn't believe how bad it was. Everything was overcooked and bland. Anything that was considered foreign was avoided with near religious zeal. And at least for me, what epitomized the food culture of Britain in the 80s was the pizza chain called Pizza Land, now defunct. Pizza Land offered its customers an option to have their pizzas topped with a baked potato, just in case the British people who are not willing to eat foreign food get traumatized by a foreign dish called pizza. So there was this very parochial conservative food culture. But for me, the most difficult thing was that Britain's national enemy, food-wise, was garlic, which is the essence of life for Koreans. As it is told in the book, the garlic even features in our foundation myth. So when I came to Britain, not being able to eat enough garlic was very difficult. Of course, the food scene in Britain is completely different now. And I think my theory is that sometime back in the mid-90s, maybe late 90s, the British people had a collective epiphany and accepted that their food sucks. But once they did that, it opened a huge horizon for them, because once you admit that your food is not the best, why should you prefer Mexican over Korean or prefer Indian over Turkish? Anything tasty is fine. So as a result, Britain has become arguably the greatest place to eat in the world, because you can get anything, and it's got a very vibrant and exciting food culture now. Unfortunately, while my food universe was expanding at light speed, my other universe, that is economics, was being sucked into a black hole. Because from the 80s, one particular school of economics came to dominate our economic thinking. Until the 1970s, there were many different schools of economics. I talk about this in my book, Economics, the User's Guide, which the RSA turned into this amazing animation. So thank you, RSA. And there were at least 9 main schools of economics. Neoclassical economics, which is the dominant school these days, Keynesian economics, Marxist economics, developmentalist economics, Austrian economics, meant that quite a few others, and you could probably talk about there being 20 different schools of economics if you counted smaller schools that split bigger schools into sub schools and so on. Anyway, so until the 70s, these different schools were competing with each other. Sometimes they were engaged in a death match. The Austrians and the Marxists had a death match in the 20s and 30s. The neoclassicals and the Keynesians had a death match in the 60s and 70s. But very often they were learning from each other, sometimes stealing ideas, sometimes fusing ideas. I mean, it was actually more like the food scene that in Britain today. I mean, all these different culinary traditions, all being proud of their own tradition, but learning from each other, competing with each other. I mean, exchanging ideas with each other. Unfortunately, since the 1980s, economics has become the British food scene before the 1990s. There's only one kind of economics on offer. And this has created a very narrow and rigid economic thinking. And that is what I have been kind of fighting against throughout my career. Now, people may ask, well, why should I care if a bunch of academics become narrow-minded and engage in, say, intellectual monocropping, like these economists? But I think you should all care, because economics is not like, I don't know, the study of Norse language or the astronomers that are trying to identify Earth-like planets hundreds of light years away, because it has very significant and immediate impact on our lives. I think I would go as far as saying that democracy is meaningless in a capitalist economy without all citizens understanding at least some economics. Because everything is bound up in the economic economic dimension. So the culture, the national heritage, education, health, all of these things have to somehow economically justify their existence. I have met some British people who try to try to defend the monarchy by arguing that it brings in the tourist revenue. I'm not a monarchist, but what a demeaning way of justifying an institution which you believe to be at the foundation of your society. I mean, you have come to that level. So when so many collective decisions about almost every aspect of our lives are formulated and justified with the help of particular economic theory, you don't really know what you're voting for unless you understand at least some economics. Then it's like voting for contestants in a talent show. So that when you think about it, even if you don't necessarily know the economic theories behind them, you all know that economic theories affect government policies on taxes, welfare spending, interest rate, labor market regulations. I mean, we've seen how the important government policies are through the experiences of the last few weeks. Yeah? And these policies in turn affect our individual economic situations by influencing our jobs, working conditions, wages, repayment burdens on the mortgages or student loans, our rents. Yeah. But economics does actually a lot more than that, because given its dominance, it has basically come to shape our society in rather fundamental ways. Yeah? Different economic theories assume different qualities to constitute the essence of human nature. So the dominant school of economics, the Neoclassical school, assumes that human beings are essentially selfish. And the dominance of this theory has normalized self-seeking behavior. And these days, people who act in an altruistic way are either derided as suckers, as the Americans call them, or are suspected of having some selfish ulterior motive. And this has created a society where it is difficult to cooperate with each other, where it is difficult to advocate a policy that takes the social collective interest into account. Now everything's supposed to be about individual gains or losses, and people are supposed to vote all according to their economic gains and so on, gains and losses. And yeah, indeed, I mean, this has clearly been proven wrong through the Brexit vote. Yeah? Because I still remember David Cameron campaigning in favor of remaining in Europe with this big check with a sum like, I don't know, £3,400, telling people that our estimate is that if we exit the European Union, everyone will be better off by £3,460 on average. Yeah? But people said, no, I mean, that I don't care about the money as much as you think that I do. I care about our sovereignty, our the national identity. However, the economists might think these are misguided ideas. People do care about these things. Anyway, so the economics even affects what kind of society we have, by telling people this or that is normal economic behavior, this or that is clever economic behavior, and so on. So in this book, I am trying to lure people into thinking about economics and learning economics, because it's so important in having a democratic system that works. So I basically try to bribe my readers with interesting stories about food at the beginning of each chapter, which are all named after some food ingredient. So Stephen mentioned some of these, the chicken, garlic, acorn. Well, you didn't know you could eat acorn. The Koreans actually eat acorn. So each chapter starts with some story about that food item. It could be, I don't know, the biological nature of that the food item, could be the history surrounding it, could be my personal relationship with that food item. And then somehow I morph those food stories into an economic story. So hopefully the reader will start reading the chapter because they find the food story interesting. But then before you know it, they'll be reading about economics. Now, how about that? Be warned that this is not a book about economics of food, how food is produced and traded and consumed and wasted. I mean, there are lots of good books about it. So the food stories in my book are just bribes to lure the readers into thinking about economic issues and learning economics. It's a bit like the ice cream that some of your mothers that might have offered you in order to induce you to eat greens. Yeah. If you eat your greens, I'll give you an ice cream, at the end of the meal. But my bribe is even better, yeah? Because the bribe comes first. Yeah? So that you don't have to actually continue to read the economic stories, but hopefully my economic stories should be interesting enough, because I have taken care to make it very diverse. Yeah? I drawn different economic theories. I drawn examples from different countries. I talk about many different aspects of the economic world today. Whether it's automation, migration, climate change, the care work, inequality. So hopefully the main dish that is economics that should be interesting enough. But if you don't like that, you can just stop after you eat the ice cream. Yeah? Anyway, to conclude, actually, when it comes to food, most people agree that we should have an open mind and try different things. Yeah? I mean, this country actually has proven that. Yeah? I mean, this deeply conservative the food culture has been completely transformed into something marvelous, because people decided that to be open-minded and try different things. So that I urge my readers to do the same with economics. Yeah? There are all these different economic theories. They all have their strengths and weaknesses. But a healthy diet of economic ideas should include different schools of economics drawn from different countries. Explore the philosophy and the politics behind the economic ideas. And yeah, I hope my book contributes to encouraging the people to think about economic issues and learn economics in a more diverse and interesting way. Thank you very much.
Ha-Joon, thank you so much. And you're right. Your book definitely lures you in with the tastes and smells of world cuisine, and then you get the economic lesson afterwards, which is definitely the way forward, I would say. So look, we'll delve more into the tasty morsels in your book shortly, but I can't begin without asking you about the current economic and political turmoil in the UK. So for context, we're recording this conversation on the 21st of October, 2022. So that's less than 24 hours after the resignation of the UK Prime Minister, Liz Truss. Things are moving very fast and very unpredictably. So by the time everyone's listening to this, much may have changed. So Ha-Joon, accounting for that, and from where we stand today, what's gone wrong and what can be done to put it right?
I think Britain's economic malaise goes back much further than the current conservative government. It all started with Mrs. Thatcher in the 1980s. Now, in the 1970s, the post-war economic consensus of Britain broke down. So new model of the capitalism based on the welfare state and active intervention by the government into international trade and industry and so on. That model broke down, and what it replaced was Thatcherism. And Thatcherism did this original experiment with so-called trickle-down economics. Yeah? Cut taxes and encourage cut taxes and privatize the state-owned enterprises and deregulated the economy. Now, among the supporters of conservative economic program, there's this myth that Mrs. Thatcher came in and fixed the economy. Yeah? But actually, if you look at the economic the data, the rate of economic growth during Mrs. Thatcher's rule was actually lower than what it was in the 1970s. More importantly, the rate of investment as a proportion of GDP was actually lower than in the 70s. Now, this is a big problem because the justification for tax cuts and deregulation was when you do that, there'll be more investment and there'll be more growth. It did not happen. So that the current, sorry, I shouldn't say current, that the trust that the government was trying to kind of reintroduce the Thatcherite program, put it on a turbocharge, and hope that this will get the British economy out of the doldrums, which it had been at least since the days of the 2008 global financial crisis. But what was even more kind of problematic is that the conditions that this program was introduced were not even similar to what the Margaret Thatcher faced. At that point, you could at least theoretically accept that, yeah, maybe if you cut taxes, the investing class will invest more. Maybe if you deregulate the economy, there'll be more business activities. It was actually not the case, but at that in 1980, you could, maybe think that. But now, I mean, you know that those things didn't happen. More importantly, in the last 20 years, the supply side capacity of the British economy has been seriously eroded, because the economy basically has been driven by the financial sector seeking short-term gain. The rate of investment in the British economy, which used to be 27, 28% during the 70s, 24-5% during the Thatcherite years. In the last 10, 12 years, it has been like at the level of 16, 70%. So with that such little investment, the supply capacity is seriously eroded. I mean, you do not have enough the ability to produce things. So now we have two problems. First of all, you have an investing class which doesn't invest. And you cannot even argue that the tax rate was so high, like in the 70s, cutting them would make a huge difference. No, you don't even have that. But more importantly, even if you give tax cuts, and even if these non-investing investing class that invest, the supply side responses is going to be very feeble. Because you don't have the workers with the right skills. You don't have the necessary infrastructure. You don't invest in R&D as much as other countries do. Even today, the countries like Germany, Switzerland, Sweden, they invest 25, 26% of their GDP. I mean, not to speak of countries like Korea, which invest 30%. Britain invests 16, 17%. And in that kind of situation, cutting taxes, I mean, isn't going to bring about the supply side response. So this is was such a ill-conceived attempt to reverse the decline of the British economy. But we have to realize that the problem goes deeper and further back in time. I mean, that you need a serious redirection of the economy that involves a major investment drive, which has to be politically engineered. I mean, if you want to cut taxes for the rich people, you have to somehow come up with a scheme that these tax cuts will go to investment. Unless you make that political deal, I mean, whatever program you have, British economy will not recover.
So do you think, I mean, you talked about politics and economics there a lot. Do you think that politics and ideology make it impossible really to create a truly fair global economy that works for everyone?
Oh, yeah, no, it's not just ideology. I mean, there are a lot of, naked self-interest, that, for example, the rich countries, having lower tariff or even no tariff on raw materials, because as soon as developing countries that process them, they slap a high tariff, thereby discouraging the economic development. So there are, I mean, so many of those things that I cannot even begin to talk about them. But there are this naked self-interest. But yes, I mean, ideology has played a very important role, because you have these people whose economic interests objectively actually do not lie with the neoliberal programs that the Tory party has been pushing for the last few decades, voting for that party, and blaming the problems to immigrants, well, like myself, and foreign countries and so on. So I mean, that has made it very difficult to have a rational conversation about economic policy. But that's exactly why I'm writing the kind of books that I write, because everyone has to understand at least the basics of economics before we can have a rational conversation and hopefully the new political deal to put the British economy on another footing.
Yeah, I mean, you said earlier in the talk about how people need to understand what they're voting for in many ways. And few of us have got your decades of experience in the economy. So for us novice cooks, if you like, whose recipes should we try first? Which chefs make the easiest economic meals for us to digest?
Yeah, well, I think that we all have different ethical positions, different political views. So that first of all, we have to accept that economics is not a kind of purely technical thing. For example, that in calling for economic growth, that say Liz Truss, that she was advancing this particular view that aggregate growth in material production is what determines social welfare. I mean, it's a respectable position, but there are many other positions. Some economists will argue that the income needs to be equally distributed. Others will put emphasis on the social mobility. So they will say even if the income is income distribution is unequal, if you have good social mobility, that's a good society. And you can have many different positions on whether growth is counted in the right way. Environmentalists will say we are not counting the damages that growth is generating on the environment. And we have to, once you count them, actually what you call growth isn't even growth because it's reducing our welfare. Others that might not go to that extreme, but they would argue that market is a very bad judge of what is socially valuable. We've seen that. During the pandemic, you had all these people working in NHS, the school teachers working in supermarkets, producing foods, designated as the key workers, but the market says otherwise. The market that basically, except for a small group of top medical doctors, all the key workers are poorly paid. So the market has basically contradicted this notion of key worker. They are not key. They are not important. Because if they were important, they should be paid better. So there are many kind of ethical and political issues involved in our economic decisions. So I think the first step is actually to fully understand what are the ethical and then political foundations of a particular economic argument. So I'm making it that sound more difficult. But once you understand these fundamental things, it becomes actually a lot easier to learn the rest. Yeah, I mean, it's like cooking. You know, that you need to learn the basic things, and once you know them, you know, then you can apply those basic principles to do many different things. Yeah.
You mentioned care workers there, and I was really attracted by your chapter on chicken, which kind of gets into the detail of some of the things that the RSA says in its vision about equality and fairness. So I wondered if you might delve into that chapter a little bit more for us now.
Yeah, actually, that chapter that starts with arguably the weirdest story in the book. The story is that when I was a graduate student, I had this Indian friend who would travel back home with Aeroflot, which then was the Soviet airline. I mean, according to him, I never taken the Aeroflot during the Soviet days because as South Koreans, which were on the other side of the Cold War, that we are not allowed to travel on them. But you know, according to my friend, that the airline was awful in every single way. I mean, the bad food, rude service, problem with punctuality, and apparently this cold white goose bumpy chicken was the only meal available on every flight. Yeah? And passengers hated it, but you know, they just kept quiet and ate it. But one day, this Indian passenger had an audacity to ask the stewardess to bring him something else because he's a vegetarian. And the stewardess kept, no, you cannot have anything else. This is a socialist airline. Everyone is equal. Yeah? You cannot have a special treatment. So that story got me thinking, you know, that in thinking about the equality, the people on the left have often ignored the differences in people's needs. Yeah? Well, the socialist principle that is a very noble one, noble one, because it says, you know, everyone is everyone is equally valuable human being, and everyone should be treated the same. Yeah? So whether you are a government minister or an engineer or the cleaner, you will get your annual pair of shoes, you will get your daily ration of bread and sausages. And, you know, it is a very powerful statement. But what was missing there was that these people failed to see that different people have different needs. Yeah? Some people are vegetarian, yeah? Even like bread, you know, if the bread is wheaten bread, leavened wheaten bread, I mean, the celiacs cannot eat it. You know, Jewish people that are observing Passover cannot eat it. You know, so unless that you take into account these the differential needs, you cannot build a truly fair society. But the problem with the equality is not just on the left, but on the right too, because on the right, the emphasis is on equality of opportunity. So the right-wing defense of the high levels of inequalities, you know, as far as that people had equal opportunity to compete, we have to accept that result, however unequal it may look to some of you, because that's the way to kind of use the people in the most productive way. I mean, so their argument is that if everyone starts from the same starting line, you have to accept the result. But my question to them is it really a fair race if some contestants have only one eye and some of them have only one leg. Yeah? No, I mean that starting on the same starting line, that is equality of opportunity, doesn't mean that it is fair, because these people have failed to consider differential capabilities of different people. Yeah? And these differential capabilities partly come from the inequality of outcome. Yeah? Because unless you raise all children in the collective creche, like the Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, people children growing up in the poor families, they are going to have their brain development arrested because of malnutrition. They are going to have their education disrupted because they are hungry during the classes. You know? So unless you provide some degree of equality that will guarantee that every child has at least the minimum capabilities, you cannot call a race fair only because it gives equal opportunity to compete. Yeah? So in this chapter, I'm trying to argue that both on the right and the left, equality has been conceived in a very unidimensional way. So not only do we have to look at the outcome, as the socialists emphasize, and opportunity as the right has emphasized, we also need to look at the needs and capabilities. You know? We need this more diverse, sophisticated perspective to truly deal with the problem of inequality.
I mean, that point you make there about being more sophisticated, I mean, we talk a lot at the RSA about economic security and what that means for individuals. And often those macroeconomic measures that we have to define growth and success totally miss how real people feel about their own economic reality. What can governments do better on that front?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we have to recognize that growth is calculated on aggregate basis. Yeah? So the fact that our country grows fast doesn't mean that everyone is benefiting. Yeah? So you have to create mechanisms where these benefits can flow into less privileged people, which is one role that the welfare state provides. Yeah? One role that the welfare state plays. Yeah? So when the economy grows faster, there will be more tax revenue, and then these can be plowed back into helping people who are not necessarily benefiting from this process. Yeah? But more importantly, I would argue that giving economic security is even good for growth. Yeah? Because when people have too much insecurity, they become conservative, yeah? And not in the political sense, but in the sense of not wanting to try new things. Yeah? When they don't have security, they become resistant to changes. Yeah? For example, in the US, you don't have the public health insurance, not to speak of NHS. So the American workers usually get their health insurance from their employers. Yeah? So if you get unemployed, you cannot even go to hospitals. Yeah? So this is why American workers, of course, most of them are ununionized and cannot resist these changes. But most of the unionized American workers are actually against technological progress, yeah? Because it means that they are going to be thrown to the scrap heap of history. Yeah? In contrast, in countries like the Sweden and Finland, where there's a good welfare state which guarantees the minimum standard of living, which provides unemployment insurance, yeah? Generously, that 60–70% of your kind of normal wages are paid through unemployment insurance, and provides a lot of subsidized retraining. In those countries, workers are not that resistant to technological progress, because yeah, I mean, who likes to lose their jobs, but they will have some job, yeah, not necessarily the current one, and most likely a better one, yeah, because that you get retrained in the new skills and so on. Yeah? So yeah, when you do that, actually it becomes easier for companies to upgrade and restructure their businesses because workers are not resistant to changes. Yeah? So actually, we need to have a more kind of comprehensive view of the welfare state, which often is missing across the political spectrum. Because some people on the left only see it as a kind of redistributive mechanism. Yeah? Some people on the right have the same view, but say that this is an awful thing for the economy. Yeah? Whereas if you design it well, it can actually be even good for growth. I'm told by Swedish friends that in the 1950s, the slogan of one of the slogans of the Swedish Social Democratic Party was that, and I'm quoting them, secure people there. Yeah? Only when you know that trying new things, changing jobs, acquiring new skills that doesn't put you at the risk of the penury, you will do those things more willingly.
A couple more questions before we close, Ha-Joon. In our current situation, most of us around the world are looking at our governments, wherever we are, and hoping that they have some levers that they can pull that will fix things. Is it a question of new people being put in charge of those levers, or do we even have the right levers to pull them?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, I'm not a political scientist, so I don't think I can say many useful things there. But I think what is the problem at the moment, I mean, not everywhere, of course, that in many countries, is that people have become very, if you like, short-sighted because they don't see much hope for the future. And it's actually the absence of mobility, absence of future change, poverty of future prospect that are driving people into the arms of this short-term oriented populist politician. So I think that what is more important is to create the sense of hope for the future rather than trying to kind of fix things for the present. I mean, of course, there are a lot of things to be fixed for the present, but if we just stop it there, if you say, okay, I mean, we have starving children, so let's give out more free school lunch, I mean, that might solve the immediate problem, but it still doesn't create that sense of hope for those children and their families. So we need to create a system where that you can that people can have more sense of hope. Well, beyond that general level, I don't think I'm quite qualified to comment on how to fix the political problems.
Well, so finally, then you mentioned hope. Maybe what is it that gives you hope for the future? Given the turmoil and uncertainty in the economic dining room at the moment, what gives you hope for the future? And if you can't do that, just give me a great Korean recipe that we should all try.
No, I'm I live by the kind of dictum of the Italian Marxist of the early 20th century, Antonio Gramsci, that you should have pessimism of the intellect, but optimism of the will. And in the long run, I'm quite hopeful because of the young generation. This the young generation has really stepped up to the challenge. They are very conscious of climate change. They are very active in taking actions about it. Yeah, I mean that more narrowly within the economics. Since the 2008 financial crisis, that we have seen this movement by students calling for the reform of the economics curriculum. Of course, the establishment resisted very strongly, so that we haven't seen a lot of changes. But those people have created this awareness that teaching of economics has to change. And many of them are now doing bigger campaigns. I mean, many of them are engaged in the kind of educating the general public in the economics, also learning from the general public how economics should change to reflect their life experiences. You know, I mean that some of these people have gone into government economic services and central banks, and yeah, of course they are still junior, so they cannot make huge changes. But I know that many of them have been kind of arguing for different approaches, yeah, and yeah, made some inroads, yeah. So yeah, I'm very hopeful that the young generation has really this kind of perspective and willingness, and more importantly, organizational skills to change our society. So yeah, I think that we should live in hope.
Ha-Joon, thank you so much.
Thank you.
The book, Edible Economics, A Hungry Economist Explains the World, is out now. You can find it online and in bricks and mortar bookshops everywhere, although we have a special discount with foils if you follow the link on the RSA's event page. If you like what you've heard, please delve into the archive of hundreds of previous RSA events and look at our website for the impressive series of future ones we have planned, all for free. Also online, you'll find our new Design for Life mission, which follows in the best traditions and ambitions of the RSA, providing a clear-eyed diagnosis of current challenges, a hopeful vision for better futures, and an inspiring plan for how to get there, supported by our global network of fellows and thinkers and speakers like Ha-Joon. If you'd like to join the RSA's growing fellowship, you can find the details online and in the chat. But for now, thank you for listening, and Ha-Joon Chang, thank you for coming back and speaking to us at the RSA.
Thank you.